I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the moderator for the panel. My name is Cecile Noel, and you are in the panel that is up there, DV, IPV, in supportive housing. How can we help, right? So that's the panel for this afternoon. So just to give you a little of my story, I am the commissioner for the mayor's office to end domestic and gender-based violence. It was formerly the mayor's office to combat domestic violence, and in last year, in the fall of 2018, the mayor expanded our mission to, in addition to intimate partner violence, an area that we'd been working in for over 18 years, he expanded our mission to include now also human trafficking, sexual violence, stalking, and family violence. So, and we who work in this area know that these issues are all really connected in many, many ways. We know that survivors experience not only one kind of victimization often it's multiple. So we think that our expansion of the mission is really timely, and I think this panel is a wonderful panel to begin to talk about how can we really think about the needs of survivors in addition to shelter, but beyond shelter as well, and how can we think about that in a permanent housing context. So I have some wonderful panelists on the panel here, and I'd like them to introduce themselves and maybe tell you a little bit about their backstory. So let's start with Dani.
Hi, I'm Dani, and I'm program coordinator for Safe Homes Project. It's a program with Good Shepherd Services, and I also went to school for art therapy. Actually, my first job was as caseworker in supportive housing at Lutheran Social Services, so I'm really grateful to be here. And when I was working there, completing psychosocials for people every year, I noticed a common thread in people's background of experiencing trauma. And that is what really brought me to work with domestic violence survivors. And in this role, I started out at Safe Homes Project as caseworker again, and now as program coordinator, I'm doing more community education, working with survivors for 5 years. I really wanted to do something more and go out in the community and work with adults and especially with youth to provide education about domestic violence and healthy relationships.
Thank you, Dani. And now, Jamie.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie DeHart. I am the Housing Program Director for Unity House of Troy, their domestic violence program. I came into this work originally through the counseling field. I worked with school-age kids in an inner-city school in Troy, and I saw a lot of homelessness with families. And that kind of led me to working for Unity House. I applied there, fell in love with the advocacy work, and started in with their domestic violence program. I did a lot of teen dating violence trainings with youth. I also worked with CPS, advocating on behalf of survivors, and then very recently got into the housing program director position. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. I think domestic violence touches on everyone's lives in some type of way. So it matters what we do, the work that we do here.
Thanks, Jamie. And now Jennica.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennica Huff. I'm a senior project manager with the Community Builders. The Community Builders is a nonprofit, affordable, and mixed-income housing development company whose mission is to build and sustain strong communities where people of all incomes can achieve their full potential. I've been working in this field for quite some time. It's been a passion of mine, I think, probably ever since high school, and connecting the physical, the building, the physical plant, the building with supportive services has been a specific passion of mine since I've been working in Massachusetts and Connecticut and then moved to New York. So.
Okay, thank you, Jennica. So the format that we'll engage in for this panel, Dani's going to do a presentation for us, and then Jennica and Jamie together will do a presentation on a very innovative project that we'd love you all to hear about, and then have some conversation and discussion, some questions that we can ponder and talk about together about this project. So we'll start out with Dani. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm going to present on domestic violence awareness for advocates or providers, social workers. So, Safe Homes Project, a little bit more. We were established in 1976, and when it was, when there wasn't, much going on, and people were in Park Slope calling people to get rooms or sleep on people's couches, and there was a listserv, and people placed people in safe housing and safe dwellings. And since then, Safe Homes Project has grown a lot and is now with Good Shepherd Services. And we provide advocacy, we have shelter, we have a hotline, counseling. We work with families as well. We do consultations, trainings, educational services, and we provide services in both English and Spanish. We work with youth and LGBTQ survivors. So what is domestic violence? It is a pattern of behaviors and tactics that are socially learned and condoned, used by one partner in an intimate relationship to maintain control and power over another partner. These tactics are physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, financial coercion, and abuse usually escalates in frequency and severity over time. So the important two words are power and control, and we'll get more into that later in the slides. So there's a lot of myths out there about domestic violence, so we're just going to go over a few. One that's out there is that only men are abusers. So the fact is that both men and women can be abusers, but statistically, women are victims more often than men, and female victims suffer proportionately more serious injuries and homicides than male victims. Another myth is that abuse only happens in heterosexual relationships. And the fact is that abuse happens in same-sex, gender, or LGBTQ relationships actually at the same rate. And I was looking up some studies that said it could be even more. A myth, only poor, uneducated, substance-abusing, or mentally ill people are violent in their relationships. And the fact is that relationship violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, if one person is seeking control over another. A myth that survivors of domestic violence are bad or neglectful parents. Many survivors are doing whatever they can to keep their children safe, even if it means more danger to themselves. A myth, victims can leave if they really want to, and I probably hear this one the most. So trying to leave actually can cause an escalation in violence and make things more dangerous. That is why getting help and safety planning is really important before leaving. And another big myth is that couples that fight are being mutually abusive. So there's no such thing as being mutually abusive. Fighting and abuse are very different. Abuse is not about fighting or conflict or even anger. These are normal things that happen in many relationships. And abuse is about controlling an intimate partner through threats, intimidation, manipulation, isolation, and sometimes the abuse is not visible at all. And we'll talk more about that. So here are some dating violence statistics, and you can see in the image, which is from Safe Horizons, and in the small font, you might not be able to see, but it says 2 out of 3 Americans have never talked about domestic violence with their friends. And this is especially true for youth. The statistics are really small for, I think it's maybe 3% to 6% our youth are talking about being in a domestic violence relationship. And then you can see how common it really is. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, 2 in 5 lesbians, 1 in 4 gay men, 2 in 5 black women, 1 in 5 Latinas, and 1 in 5 Asian Pacific Islander women. And in New York City, the police department responds to approximately 230,000 domestic violence incidents a year. Intimate partner homicide accounts for over half of all NYC-related homicides. And I know people in here are not just from the New York City area. So nationally, 66.2% of female stalking victims reported stalking by a current or former intimate partner. and 1 in 10 women in the United States will be raped by an intimate partner in her lifetime. 1 in 3 female murder victims and 1 in 20 male murder victims are killed by intimate partners. And between 21 and 60%, I know it's a large number, but I thought it was important to note that victims of intimate partner violence lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from abuse. And domestic violence definitely affects jobs, schools, housing, and financial situations. So here are some relationship red flags, and these images actually come from a really cool site. It's called That's Not Cool, and it's really good, especially for youth and dating violence. And so the first one is love bombing, which could be really hard, especially for new relationships and young relationships, because there's a lot of love and it can happen quick and it's for the first time. But with love bombing, it's an overabundance of charm and love, and the abusers will be very attentive and profess their undying love and put people up on a pedestal, saying how perfect you are. And I guess the way to tell for a red flag is like if the person is uncomfortable, if it seems inauthentic, if it's just too quick, if they're not honoring like this your pace, then that's when it's more likely it could be love bombing. And there's gaslighting, which I know the phrase had become more popular when a Teen Vogue writer wrote about how Trump was gaslighting America. And gaslighting is it's a divisive scenario where you're made to feel like you're losing grip on your reality, you doubt your own perceptions, and you'll second guess yourself at every turn. Like maybe the abuser like hides your keys and you're looking all over the house. Oh no, where are they? Can't find them. And then all of a sudden they bring them out without you seeing, and then they're like right there, and then you find them, and then they'll be like critical. Oh, see, like you need me, like or make you think you're crazy, like so things like that. And glimpses of anger, maybe it doesn't come out right away, but you can start to see, like if you're running late for a date and maybe they like they'll get really mad at you, or if you're out to eat and they'll get mad at the server, so you'll start seeing little glimpses of anger. And then Jekyll and Hyde, that's a really big one, and can be a warning sign of abusive relationship. And that's a difference between how they treat you in public and how they treat you behind closed doors. So they could be ripping you apart behind closed doors and then be really sweet in public. And then condescending and joking, making insults, but then when you say like, oh, that hurts my feelings, and it's like, oh, you're too sensitive, don't worry about it, I was just kidding. And then a lack of empathy, where the abuser has trouble putting themselves in other people's shoes. So they, you may notice like if you're talking about your day and someone just doesn't really care, and you just see an overall lack of empathy or being able to understand other people's feelings. And then lying, so just continued lying and then just lying on top of lying to cover up other lies, and then blame shifting and not taking responsibilities, and it's your fault, somebody else's fault. So all of those things could be relationship red flags, and not just for an abusive relationship, it just could be for an unhealthy relationship as well. So this is the cycle of violence. So this is really how people get kind of trapped into a domestic violence relationship. And the first one is the honeymoon stage, which happens in most all relationships. But from the honeymoon stage moves on to where tensions build. So the abuser will become moody. Maybe you'll see an increase in drinking or drugs, and start to put you down. There'll be some yelling, criticizing, and maybe some gaslighting. And then the victim's response is like, oh, like I'm gonna walk on eggshells, apologizing, trying to make them feel better, make their favorite meal. If there's kids, like keep the kids quiet, do anything they can to think, thinking that they can control the situation. But ultimately, there's an acute explosion that happens. Whether it's hitting, verbal abuse. A common one is the cell phone, smashing the partner's cell phone. And then the victim's response. Sometimes it is to leave, go to a friend's house, break up, call the police. But then the honeymoon stage starts again, and the abuser comes back and is like, I'm sorry, like, I'm going to get help. They're, having a vulnerable moment. Maybe they cry, and then the victim's response is to say, oh, I understand, like, I'll help you get help. And they, maybe take the person back. And then within all of this, both people are may be in denial about the severity of abuse, and both people may feel happy and want the relationship to continue. So they're not really acknowledging the possibility that the violence could happen again, but then it happens again, and so the cycle. And each time, that's really wearing on a victim's self-esteem, and they can start to feel really bad, and then it gets harder and harder to leave. So here are some signs of unhealthy and abusive relationships. So like I said in the beginning with the myth, so there is conflict versus abuse. So there can be relationships that have a lot of anger and a lot of fighting, but they can be both in conflict with one another. There could be a power struggle, so both people, like, not one person has all of the power. And there may just be some unhealthy things going on in a relationship, but if you see the power control wheel, that is an abusive relationship where one person, again, is maintaining power and control over someone else. So some signs are jealousy. And again, like, jealousy can happen in all relationships. But when it becomes about control, about who you can see, what you can do, and not allowing people to see family, or accusing people of cheating and things like that. So it's really about control again. And then manipulation, manipulating your decisions, your actions, and including convincing you to do things that you don't want to do. And you can see here with the coercion and threats, it's a little hard to see, a little blurry, but it says verbal and written threats to hurt or kill or end the relationship. And a big one that I hear over and over again is that that the abuser will threaten to commit suicide if the person leaves. So that one is a really big one that I hear from people when they first come into shelter, is that that happened, and it could be really hard for someone to be holding on to that, and could be a reason that people stay. And then isolation, so isolating people from friends or family, controlling contact. Sabotage, sabotaging somebody's relationship, if it's a youth, like not letting them go to school activities or even school. And also there's economic and academic abuse, controlling money, stealing money, not letting someone go to work, and then belittling and emotional abuse, excessive criticism and humiliation, and then guilting, making someone feel guilty, including being treated like everything is their fault, and the partner threatens again to hurt themselves. And guilt could also be using the children, saying that, I'm going to take the children away if you leave, and just intimidation. So it might not even be physical. Sometimes all you need to do is give a look, and maybe the person will know what that means, or just show a weapon if they have a weapon, or just threaten to destroy property. And then lastly, just deflecting responsibility, just not taking responsibility, making excuses, and shift the blame. So a big one is technology abuse now, so I wanted to highlight that, especially in young relationships. So you can see the statistic on the side, 1 in 4 teens in relationships say they have been called names, harassed, or put down by their partner or text. So what technology abuse looks like is telling you who you can be friends with on social media, monitoring those sites, stealing or making you give them your password, looking through your phone, convincing you to sex or send pictures of yourself when you don't want to, making fake profiles to harass or blame you for cheating. And I hear a lot too that this isn't just the abuser, that the abuser's family and friends also get involved in a lot of this technology abuse. So then you have multiple people, so it can be really hard. And a lot of survivors are forced to get off social media sites for their safety. And that can be really difficult because, especially if you're in a DV shelter, like there's already isolations, you have to keep the location confidential, so it can be really isolating. They can check your location, keep tabs on you. You have to be really careful because even if you don't tag your location, the pictures can still show where it was taken from. And now they have the spoofing apps, like we all know because we get all those calls that like look like numbers that we know. So you could just use a spoofing app and disguise the number, or text someone as if you're somebody else. So then you could, try to get the abuser could try to get you to, think you're somebody else and meet you, and it could be really dangerous. And then lastly, there's technology out there that you can get like spyware, so they could install something on your phone when you're not looking, and then they have like a copy of your phone, and they can see everything that's going on, your calls, your texts, and everything. So technology abuse is a really difficult one because, like with the last one, it's really hard to even tell if you have that spyware on your phone. So safety planning with survivors. So with domestic violence, when I do these presentations, a lot of the questions are like, especially when I do it for youth, they're like, oh, I know somebody in a DV relationship, like I need to get them out. How do I get them out? And people really want to, or they'll call us on the hotline, and even, social workers, providers, and want help to like get this person out of the relationship. But as DV advocates, we're never going to tell someone right out, like you need to leave that person. We're going to ask them what they want to do. So really safety planning is that first question, like what do you want to do? Do you want to stay in this relationship? Do you want to leave this relationship? And so based on that, that's where you kind of take the safety planning. So if they say, no, I don't want to leave this relationship, then you could start to safety plan with them if they're going to stay and what that looks like and how they can be safe. And then if they do want to leave, then you have a whole nother safety planning questions and things that you can let them know. And if it's a maybe, you just let them know all of their options so that they can better make a decision. So some safety planning using, and these are both for adults, for youth, and still in the relationship or having left. So using the buddy system, identifying safe places, packing a bag, just getting prepared. If they've already left, changing your routines, establishing a code word. With people, your trusted friends, especially if you're being monitored on the phone. So you could have a code word that if you text your friend like pineapple, that means you're in trouble. And then you have a plan of like action of what that friend's going to do. And if you have to meet the abuser, do it in public. Keep all of the, keep things on you, spare change, important phone numbers, an order of protection. And it's not, some survivors don't want to get an order of protection. So again, like honoring what their safety plan is best for them. Sometimes getting an order of protection could mean escalation. So really asking them what they want to do. Changing phone numbers, practicing ways to get out of the house, saying, oh, I just want to take out the trash. And then once you're out there, you can get to safety. And then practicing all of these things. If you have children, think about how to get the children out safely. Collecting all the important documents, social security cards, IDs, and then documenting all contacts, message, injuries, and incidents, because when people go to get the order of protection, they're going to need all of this. And people can call domestic violence agency or hotline for information about relationship abuse. We have our own hotline. New York City has a hotline. There's a national hotline. And in all of the boroughs, there are family justice centers. So here are some, and I'll just highlight on some of the important things about being a DV advocate. So number one is confidentiality. So maintaining confidentiality, meeting people within private, and if you can, without anyone else there, family members. And number two, believing and validating in their experience. And this is using she, her pronouns, but a lot of the images out there are still under that, but definitely he, she, they, so I'll substitute that. So believing in them and validating their experiences and acknowledging the injustice, the violence, telling them that the violence was not their fault and that no one deserves to be abused. And again, respecting the person's autonomy. They have the right to make their own decisions, and they'll leave whenever they're ready, and they're the expert of their own lives. And again, safety planning, and then promoting access to community resources, and also knowing that there are limits to how much you can address in any intervention. Focus on the time that you have with the person and don't overwhelm them. People could just be really overwhelmed easily, so talking slow and taking your time and really being realistic about what you can accomplish in that meeting, and never mislead or make promises or make up things that sound good, and just be willing to listen to pain without making it better. So it's a lot about listening and saying, like, some of the things that I tell people are, what you hold is not too much to share. You know, it's not your fault. It's okay to be angry. Some empowering approaches, because domestic violence is a social justice issue. It's not just a personal problem with a profound impact on the individuals, but it's a social problem occurring in a context of a racist, sexist, classic, homophobic society. So anger is recognized as an appropriate response to living in this kind of society, in this kind of world. And so the helper questions the patriarchal, homophobic, racist assumption and shares the understanding of how gender role expectations and stereotyping and institutionalized racism define our world and limit us. So the helper challenges their own personal biases and stereotypes in order to be effective. And the helper demystifies the helping process. So if abuse is about power and control, and the helping relationship, there is a power dynamic. So really understanding that power dynamic and trying to make it equal and bring a balance of power. And being aware of your own need to be a powerful expert. And the last one, encouraging political consciousness and social action, and recognizing that these can aid in the healing process. The person's strength, courage, creativity, and resourcefulness and other positive qualities are highlighted and explored. And this great quote comes from Leela Watson: "If you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with me, then let us work together." And just some creative approaches, because I am an art therapist, some things that we use. We have yoga and dance, and there's 2 great organizations out there in New York City, Exhale to Inhale for yoga and Give Me Dance. They both have specific programming for DV survivors, encourage creativity. Trauma, it lives in the mind, body, and soul. So encouraging creativity and spirituality and just positive activities, and using self-compassion to help people build back up their self-esteem. And support groups are really important, especially DV-specific support groups for survivors. And that is it. Here's some of the references from where I got all this information. So thank you.
Dani, thank you so much for just laying the groundwork for everyone to get, I think, a fuller understanding of domestic violence, what survivors are facing, how to be helpful when you encounter a survivor, and really just giving us a landscape in terms of just understanding the issues that survivors are facing. So now I'd like Jamie and Jennica to talk to you about an innovative project around serving domestic violence survivors in housing.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for spending your last session with us. We appreciate it. We realize that we're your last stop before the reception. So I am, here, I'll click to the next slide. That would be helpful. So again, I'm with the Community Builders. We partnered with Unity House well before we actually cited where we located Tapestry on the Hudson, about probably 8 months prior to actually closing on the acquisition of the property. We were talking to Unity House about what were the greatest needs in Troy. Oh, this is not what I had intended, but I'm going to put it all up there. So really planning with survivors in mind, it happens at all stages. So Tapestry on the Hudson, we purchased the property in August of 2014 before we even put any financing applications in. Prior to that, in February of 2014, we were collaborating with Unity House. And we placed the building in service, fully constructed in April of 2017, and had it fully leased by August of 2017, and throughout that whole process. And then in December of 2017, we converted to permanent financing. And throughout that whole process, we maintained close contact with Unity House. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces, is that throughout this whole process, you're maintaining contact with your service provider and understanding what the different issues are. So in preliminary planning, during this stage, we selected Unity House to help us navigate and determine what outcomes we wanted to achieve in providing services for survivors of domestic violence. And we also identified funding streams that allowed us to bring all of the capital financing together that was needed for the physical development, and also Unity House. Ishai wasn't a thing when we first started off with Tapestry. So Unity House gave us an in-kind donation for services for one full-time employee for 1 year at Tapestry, which helps us to leverage additional funding for services into the deal, which was critically important and played an important role in getting the Homeless Housing Assistance Program funding through OTDA for the capital development, and also then subsequently the Ishai funding for the services. So you're doing your pre-development planning, you're getting your all your public approvals in place, and developing the actual program in terms of services. You're designing the physical building and what it wants to be. Throughout this whole process, it's very important to keep the nature, the confidential nature, the survivor population to be served confidential throughout the entire process of the public approvals and soliciting funding from the funding agencies. It's important to note that finance assembly can have implications for property management staff and service providers once, relative to workflow, once the buildings are placed into service. So understanding how layering the different financing and all the conditions that are associated with that financing then affect the ability to provide services is important for the developer to hold and to communicate effectively to all of the stakeholders at the table. If there's project-based rental assistance involved in the development, it's very important that the local PHA, that the whole development team understands how the notification of availability for those public project-based vouchers are made. You want to, again, maintain the confidential nature of the survivor population. And then likewise, just ensuring that all funding sources have a vested interest in the lease-up and the marketing plan, and that everybody's in agreement in terms of what it wants to be at least 5 months prior to the first units coming online and being available. When utilizing Ishai, the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative funding, it's also important to advocate with your administering agency for those funds to start the grant contract at least 4 to 5 months in advance of the units being made available. This allows for bringing the survivors from shelter to permanent housing in a manner that's appropriate. Oftentimes it's unfortunate, but depending on the financing mix, the most vulnerable populations have the longest pathway to permanent housing. In some instances, depending on how the financing is layered, they may have to go through 3 screening processes. And it's very challenging. And that on top of the nature of their abuse. Their abusers have isolated them. They have no financial means. They may have bad credit. They may have back bills that they need to pay to previous landlords or utility companies. They may have criminal records that are not their fault. All of these things have to be navigated, and the service provider has to provide advocacy to the owner developer. And it's a lot to navigate. So it takes a while to bring someone from shelter to permanent housing because of all of those things. So that's the biggest thing that I could stress is, just bringing the ESHI contract on board well before the units are made available. In addition, if you're utilizing low-income housing tax credit funding on top of all of these other sources, the developer is beholden to the investor to lease up the units within a specific time frame, or else you lose money. And so there's a tension sometimes between the developer and the property management staff and the service provider. The developer saying, we need these units leased now, get them in and qualify the units, and you can only work so fast. They may have lost their phone number. They may not be where they were, a week prior. And so it may be a challenge to find them to get the documents that are needed to complete the overall application. So there's a lot to it. So really having a developer partner, a service provider, and a property management company that fully understands the complexity of bringing these units online and the tensions that are created because of conditions of different funding sources is really important. So workflow is important. There's all types of other things to note. So when you're utilizing soft sources of subsidy from other state agencies, potentially homes and community renewal, there are housing services agreements that are associated with that funding source. And sometimes the important thing to note there is that the housing services agreement is, you need, as the developer owner, you need to make sure that housing services agreement aligns with the grant contract obligations of the ESHI funding and your memorandum of understanding with your service provider. That housing services agreement is an attachment to the regulatory agreement, which is a publicly recorded document. Oftentimes, the housing services agreement will explicitly label what populations are being served and the address of that location. So just advocating that you can maintain as much confidentiality as possible with respect to those items. There's all types of stuff. There's, between the federal government and the state government, there's different definitions of homelessness. So navigating that relative to your survivor households is something to note. At the end of the day, the point is with Finance Assembly that the more funding sources you have, the more masters you have, the more conditions and how things fit together. So keeping everybody in line in terms of confidentiality is a must, and the messaging, a lot of people like to promote the good work that they're doing, but just maintaining that you can't be explicit about the special population that's being served at this location. And then again, just, communicating the conditions of the financing sources at the end of the day, your property management staff and your service provider get to spend more time actually providing the services versus trying to understand the reporting structure. So those are all important things to note. So then here with Tapestry, you can see we're at the point of site selection in pre-development. This is the back end of the Meridian building. It abuts the Hudson River. That's the Hudson River right there. So working with Unity House, talking about site suitability, what are the resources around the site that would be appropriate for survivors, and what's not there, and who do we need to partner with to bring it there, things of that nature. So in pre-development planning, you're looking at your design and your programmatic development. So all of this happens in partnership, again, with your service provider and your property management staff. So you're determining the staffing that's needed to provide the services and the property management and maintenance services. You're also assessing the physical space needs for all of the entities involved. You're also, from a physical plan perspective, determining the amount of housing that the site can accommodate as of right, and what are the minimum security requirements versus the desired security requirements specific to the survivor population. So do you want to have a secure entry that logs access, for instance? Does property management need to maintain a ban list for the property? What does it look like, and what are the parameters of such a ban list? And how can the design of the physical entry promote the use of such a list? So these are all questions that we ask ourselves. What design layout will provide maximum privacy, confidentiality for survivors to access the service provision? So, and also from a programmatic perspective, reviewing with the team to have a common understanding around roles, responsibilities, and workflow for service provision relative to the outcomes that we had set at the outset of the visioning process. And again, the core team is developed here, and understanding where our weaknesses are and what other outside agencies need to be brought into the picture to fill out the whole of the picture for survivor service provision. And again, to the extent that low-income housing tax credits are utilized, the developer needs to be very clear about the lease-up expectations and what milestones we need to hit in order to not lose equity investment into the development. And at this time, we're also working through and finalizing our management plans. So this is all pre-construction. So our management plans outline, the emergency call tree and hours of operations and what work orders look like and how quickly they'll be done. Well, all of that stuff has to be filtered through the lens of trauma-informed care. Issuing a lease violation is going to look very different for a survivor of domestic violence than it would for a non-survivor, a household that hasn't experienced domestic violence. The same is true potentially for maintenance calls. That might look very different for a survivor household versus someone who hasn't experienced domestic violence. So all of that stuff needs to be articulated in the management plan, and working with your service provider to do annual trauma-informed care trainings so that we stay current, both from a maintenance perspective, property management, and the development team receive these trainings on an annual basis. I was just at one last 2 months ago. So here's an example of some of the stuff that we did at Tapestry. So this is our camera plan. We had 67 interior and exterior cameras that we developed when we did the construction, and we did conduit for 8 to 12 more future locations. We included additional camera installation and maintenance in our eShy contract. So we developed this plan with our property management staff, and then we took it to Unity House and had them confirm that this was acceptable. They actually said, "Wow, we thought you were only going to put 12 cameras in, but we have 67." So, so then going through the actual design. So this is our schematic design as of. Okay. So this was in August of 2014. So this was right before we submitted our financing application to HCR. Our architectural team wanted to economize the entryway right here. And so you have the maintenance people entering the gym area and the resident service coordinator, or this would be Unity House's office. This doesn't give any kind of privacy for people accessing services for the survivors. Our property management office is right here, so they would have to walk past property management office, past maintenance, and get into the to access services. And there's also no natural light into this space. So then we got input from our, Unity House and Design team, and we revised this so that the resident service office is here. This ended up being maintenance. It's not electrical, and the door is actually right here. But this is a stairwell here, so survivors that want to have total confidentiality in accessing the services can come down the stairwell and go right into the office here. This is a big window, so there's natural light in here, and it has shades, so that can offer privacy also. But so things like that, just really being mindful of how you set up the space, and that all happens in conjunction, with feedback from Unity House or your service provider. So here we're actually in construction. There was a stairwell that you saw on the site selection slide. That's gone now. What used to sit right here. This is the Hudson River. So we're getting ready to repair the seawall. Here's what's going on. So even while in construction, you're walking through your service provider and your property management staff to address issues in the field as they come up. So then you're finishing construction and you're about to head into initial lease up. Again, just coordinating is a huge must. So lease up workflow and activity discussion should include the service provider, development, property management, the local COC to the extent that ESHI funding is involved or is needed or desired, the administering O agency, and potentially the housing authority to the extent that there's a housing referral agreement in place with the local PHA. Again, this is to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of confidentiality when working through marketing and leasing for survivors. We already mentioned that developers have a real obligation to the equity investor in terms of lease up. So just making sure, again, that you communicate what the expectations are. Working with the local continuum of cares can have, depending on how integral they are to your team and how communicative the team is, they can have a potential negative or positive effect. Each continuum is different, but they can add complexity to the process in terms of their coordinated entry. So being very communicative about the expectations from the outset is key. The positive is that they have a confidentiality form that allows for information sharing across all of its members. So if you, the developer, and the service provider, and the housing authority are all a member, then you can share information readily with respect to applications, which is very, very helpful. And then budget revisions. So including in your so you're finalizing your contracts at this point and your MOUs with your service provider. Make sure that you have language in these agreements to allow for budget input so that you can ensure maximum coordination for the survivor's benefit. With ESHI grant contracts, if you reassign over 10% of the total grant from personnel services to non-personnel services, it requires an additional layer of approval, not just OTDA or the O agency, but the comptroller has to review it as well. So setting those budgets from the outset with maximum flexibility to provide for programming for the survivors is key. And a special consideration here is that given that the nature of abuse from in terms of survivors is isolation in every way, financial, social, everything, because it's about control, allowing for service funding through ESHI to offer programming to incorporate survivors into the larger community. So it's programming. At Tapestry, for instance, we have events where all of our residents can come. It's not just about the survivors, so that they have the chance to integrate and connect with people who are not survivors. Is what I found is key, and so you can build in flexibility into the ESHI budgets for that purpose, and then planning your interim operating budget. So understanding where your cash flows are coming from. Ultimately, our service providers are going to provide the best service when they feel valued. How do they feel valued? Well, a big part of that is being paid, right? So making sure that you have the money during interim operations during your lease up to pay your service provider is key. And getting your security contract on board within the first month that your first unit is leased to increase the sense of safety in your community is also very key. So this is communicating the lease up. This is an example from one of our developments. You communicate the address, unit type, square footage, size, occupancy requirements, income restrictions, rent, utility allowances, accessibility, age restriction, ESHI designation, and the construction completion estimated date. By building and by unit. So you can't see the columns, but I just read off the columns. So making sure that your service provider is aware of what the expectations are and that you're working together towards that end so that you have a financially whole picture at the end of the day is important. And I'm about to run out of time. So then there's, this is an example of the interim operating budget. We had a source. So this was from a multi-building site. We have income. So the building's leased up in different phases. So we have rental. This is ESHI coming in at the top here. ESHI is a reimbursement program. It comes in on a quarterly basis. So you have your quarterly tranches there. Then we had money coming in from the development budget. So you can budget in interim operating expenses, marketing expenses, fixtures, furnishing, all this comes in here. And then this is the rental income that's coming in. And so understanding what your total income inflows are and then being able to budget and understand how you can pay for your staffing in your security contract is important. And then this, like I said, our most vulnerable populations have the longest pathway to permanent housing. This is just an example of some of the workflow that we articulated in a pictorial so that we could get all of our team members on the same page for a development that we did in Schenectady. We don't have to spend too much time here, but just the point is communicate, collaborate on all levels throughout the whole process. So then you're at completion and you're working towards full lease up. So you're welcoming the survivors into their households. You're establishing your workflow for post initial lease up, so it's ongoing leasing. You're coordinating with your service provider around work orders. And trauma-informed care, which we talked about, and maintaining bi-monthly and then eventually quarterly meetings between the service provider and property management to discuss incident reports, work orders, and rents receivable so that you can identify the small fires before they become, emergencies, and working to understand, okay, well, this household is not typically late on rent, but they have fallen behind by 45 days. Let's work together to figure out how can we correct the situation. And then also, I guess just lastly, and then I'm going to flip it over to Jamie here, but it's important to note that just as the physical plant needs to go through a whole year of seasons with respect to extreme heating and cooling in order to understand where your vulnerabilities are with the physical plant, so too is that true for your service provider and property management workflow relative to operations and service provision. You really have to go through a full year to understand where are your vulnerabilities. And so be gentle with yourself and your team as you progress through the first year of operations. You will work out the kinks, and it's not unique to the property just because it has survivors or any other special population for that matter. It happens to all properties during the first year. You just work out the kinks. An example of that is at Hillside. We had a big snowstorm, and one of the gas exhausts for our heating system got covered over. We didn't know, our property management maintenance staff didn't know that's a place where we need to keep clear or else the whole heating will shut down. And so that stuff happens, and so we know now for years to come that that's a vulnerability of ours. And so this is tapestry completed. This is the elevated green deck And this is the building. There's parking below here. This is the elevated green structure. And there it is.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie DeHart. And like I said earlier, I'm the Housing Program Director for Unity House. So Unity House actually has a lot of different housing programs, but this is very unique in that it's case management that's right on site where the residents are living. And one thing that I wanted to talk about mainly is what that case management looks like and how we built relationships with the staff that's at the Tapestry building and the relationships that we have with the survivors that live in the building. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Of course that happens when I'm going to present, you know. So like Jennica said earlier, we really worked hard to build relationships with the Tapestry staff before even clients residents moved in. And this was key, having effective communication with the staff that works there between the staff at Tapestry and the Unity House staff. We provided trauma-informed care trainings, and that's really to talk about the population, the domestic violence survivor population. A lot of times there's barriers for these people just because trauma can affect their everyday interactions. Trauma can affect something like maybe they don't want to talk to a maintenance person out of fear that they'll get in trouble, you know? So trauma really kind of is a real big barrier for them. So doing that trauma-informed care trainings with the staff at Tapestry and the maintenance staff, I think really helped in fostering some understanding around the domestic violence survivor population. We also did some DV 101 trainings with all of the staff as well. And I think it's helpful because not everybody knows about domestic violence or the intricacies of it. I can tell you that when I started working in the domestic violence field, I was like, wow, I know like nothing. But even just having those trainings can really help others understand what survivors go through, the barriers that they have to overcome, the hoops they have to jump through. Because I can tell you this, if you or I were doing something like maybe just going to the grocery store, it's easy. We hop in our cars, we go. For a survivor, they may not have access to a car, and then they have to take the bus. If they have kids with them, nobody to watch the kids, and they have the kids with them as they're going grocery shopping on the bus, and then just coming back home with the groceries. They have all this stuff and these kids, and they have to deal with the transportation of the bus. So it's like an extra 5 steps for anything that a survivor seems to have to do just for simple daily tasks. So I think those DV 101 trainings really helped in understanding some of those barriers as well and why survivors may not respond in the typical way that staff at Tapestry may expect them to, like the other residents might respond. I think survivors sometimes, because of their trauma, respond in a different way. And working together to create a building of community, like Jennica said, that was one of the main components of this project is, creating community for survivors who may not have had that previously in their life. They may have been isolated in their relationships and maybe never felt safe going out into the community. So Tapestry it's basically a building that's on lockdown. You have to ring the bell to get in or have a key to get in, and that in itself creates a safe space for survivors of domestic violence. And then even within that space, they can build relationships with other residents, not just other survivors, but the other people in the building as well. And one thing that I think is great for the survivors that moved into Tapestry is these are luxury apartments. They're beautiful apartments that survivors may not have been able to afford otherwise, but because of all of the development and all of the funding, they're able to live in these beautiful apartments with their families. I would say communication is one of the biggest things as we were going through this project, and especially bringing residents into the building, the survivors from shelter into the building. There were some barriers, especially because advocates have to operate under the Violence Against Women's Act when it comes to confidentiality. So we have a lot of confidentiality restrictions. And with that being said, we have to have very time-limited releases signed by our clients that are specific. So I think sometimes working within those VAWA restrictions, it posed some barriers, but we got through them, especially with the help of the survivors and the other staff having an understanding that we have to deal with those barriers. And with the case management, so what that looks like at Tapestry is we have a full-time case manager that's located in the building, and we also have a full-time counselor as well, a mental health counselor. They share the office space that's in the back of the building, which you all saw on the plan, and it's like the perfect location for that space, because anybody who might feel a little intimidated going to the domestic violence office, they're walking through all these hallways, they have that option to just go there without being really noticed. In fact, I was just there a couple weeks ago, and a young girl, she's I think she's 17, she's in high school. Her mom is part of our program of the collaboration. She's a survivor. And this young 17-year-old, she's been having a lot of school problems. She saw all of the abuse that her family went through, and it caused a significant amount of trauma for her. It affects her schoolwork, affects her relationships with other people, and especially her other classmates. And she was so intimidated to come to the office, but literally I was there last week, and she just came down for the first time in a year, and she was like, hey, I just have to talk to somebody. And she was able to do that without being noticed, without having that fear of, are they going to talk about me going to the office? So just even in the planning work, it really helped that they thought about that between Unity House and Community Builders. They thought about how are we going to make this safe for survivors? So one thing that the on-site case manager and mental health counselor do is they provide holistic and wraparound services. So Unity House Domestic Violence Program has a lot of partnerships built up already. For example, with Rensselaer County Courts, so family court and city court, we can help people get orders of protection, help people apply for or go for custody of their kids. We work with the local child welfare office. We also work with the local Department of Social Services. So we have a lot of these connections and a lot of services that we can provide to our clients. And even though the case manager and the mental health counselor are located at Tapestry, they still give that information from our outreach office, which is within a mile of the Tapestry building. So if domestic violence survivors that are living on site need other services, like, for example, an order of protection, that case manager that's on site can help set them up with an appointment with our family court advocate. And that's what I'm talking about with the wraparound services. It's really like an all-inclusive thing. If you need something, if Unity House can't help with it, we're going to link you up with services that can. One thing to note is, like Dani was saying about victims aren't always going to be women. They can be men too. Tapestry building, we actually have a couple male survivors in the building as well with their families. So it's not just women that are in that building. That was just a note that I made, something important to talk about. One of the barriers that we came into with the case manager and the counselor, they actually share that office in the back space. So what we noticed happened in the beginning was, if somebody wanted to come in and talk with a counselor, they would have that case manager in that same space. But one of the workarounds we did was, because the case manager has such a close relationship with all the clients in the building anyway, she would schedule that time to go on home visits, basically in the building with the clients. Or even just go to the community room. There's a big community room in the Tapestry building, and even just meeting with the survivors in the community room and maybe doing like an art project, or just sitting and talking, or having coffee or something with them. So that was one way that we kind of worked out that. And like Jennica was saying, sometimes you have these small barriers that come up, in the beginning and as you're bringing clients in, but you just kind of figure out ways to get through them and how to work them out, and it's usually because of the communication, it works out okay. Some of the things that we do at the Tapestry building, there's yoga classes that our case management team kind of puts on, I think a couple times a month. There's also like weekly art groups that they do, and lots of mindfulness techniques too. So they'll do like group counseling type sessions to talk about, how can you be more mindful in your daily living? How can you kind of come up with tools to kind of get through your daily activities and things like that. And again, because trauma affects every part of these people's lives. I would say that Unity House domestic violence staff also really works hard to assist both the residents at Tapestry, the survivors, and the Tapestry staff in their communication as well. I kind of like to think of it as they are liaisons, I would say, the case manager and mental health counselor. So sometimes there are things that come up with the survivors that live in the building that maybe the Tapestry staff doesn't know necessarily how to address, or they're trying to think about the trauma-informed care training that they had. So they might talk with one of the case managers of how can I address this with this resident. And that's a communication back and forth. And on the flip side, the case manager at Unity House also can work with the residents when they have questions or issues about, like I said before, the maintenance stuff. They have something wrong in the apartment and they don't know who to talk to or who to go to about it, or maybe they're nervous about it. So the case manager and the mental health counselor both can assist in that kind of stuff as well. There's also a lot of other benefits to having the domestic violence staff located at Tapestry. And one thing that we found was that other residents in the building kind of know that the domestic violence office is there, or that Unity House has an office there. And we had someone who was living in the building that actually came down to the office to talk to one of the case managers. And she was being stalked by her ex at her job. Like, he constantly was showing up to the job, stalking her on like social media and all of that stuff. And she just came down and had no idea what Unity House did or anything, just knew that they help people. And she just came down and said, hey, I don't know what to do with this. Is there anybody you know that I could talk to? And the counselor that was right there said, yes, I can help you with this. And got her referred to family court for an order of protection and kind of safety plan with her. And that was just one thing that they were able to assist this woman with. And that was really all she needed, just like help navigating the system. Excuse me. So one of the really awesome things about the Tapestry building and the funding that we've received by the eShy grant is that the case manager and the mental health counselor at Tapestry, they are able to manage the extracurricular funds to do all kinds of things with the survivors. So, and that's really a result of how much funding eShy gave to us for that. So they're able to provide new experiences to survivors and their families. And these are experiences that these people might not have had before. They may not have had any opportunity to do some of these things. I just have a couple pictures up here. Last summer, they did a fine dining dinner. One thing that came up with a lot of the survivors that were living in Tapestry is even just going out to a restaurant made them nervous. So in the community room, they set it up that it was like a tablecloth dinner. I think they did like chicken parm or something, but the Unity House staff actually waited on all of the survivors and their families. And that was an experience that we got so much good feedback from. Like the residents just loved it. And that's just like one example of something that they may not have had the opportunity to do, and they might not know how to act or like what to do in a restaurant, or that, they come to the table to take your order and stuff. So they've also done a dinner cruise around Lake George, which is a vacation community up north in the Adirondacks. So they took, I think it was 10 families went on the cruise. So they took the 10 families up to Lake George, hopped on one of those dinner boats, and did a whole cruise around Lake George, and that was a great experience. They've also done Six Flags with the families as well. I think that happened last summer too. But there's a dad there with his 2 kids that are in the program and living in Tapestry. His kids had never even been outside of Troy. So just the fact that they not only went outside of their hometown, but they went all the way up north to Great Escape and got this experience at an amusement park that they've never gotten to do before. And they were like joy all over their faces. They loved it. And I think their dad was just so happy that he was able to do that with them. There's also a lot of socialization activities, and that happens throughout the year. We do larger events that all of the Tapestry building, like all of the residents in the building are invited to. Like they did a harvest festival last year, last fall I think, and that was open invitation to anybody that lived in the building. And again, that goes back to what Jennica was talking about, was how can we increase the community in this building? How can we make sure that survivors are interacting in a positive way with other people and building up these relationships? They also do activities within the survivor population as well. And that helps create a bond between the survivors because they've all had some kind of a shared experience and the trauma that they've gone through. And so even those small activities, like the weekly art group, that's a bonding experience for them. So going back to when we first started having survivors move into the building, there was a bond, I think, among survivors around the trauma and around illness, because a lot of people coming in, they had different physical ailments, and they had some mental health, so they bonded around all of that. So one thing that the case manager and the mental health counselor are working on is, and have been working on this last year, is shifting that bond around the illness and the trauma and shifting that to wellness. And there's different ways that they've been doing that. Certain things like having a board outside their office door, even with different kind of recipes for families that they could try. Again, talking about wellness, maybe some therapeutic techniques that survivors can try that might help them. So just a lot of different things to try and shift that bond among survivors. And doing things that are positive for them as well. We have a gardening group every week, and that gardening group is a very positive experience. It's very kind of relaxing, I think, for a lot of the survivors to be a part of it. Just being outside, enjoying each other's company, and that's a bond around a wellness thing. And also our case manager and the mental health counselor, they help survivors learn life skills. So, some of the people that came into the apartment complex, they may not have had their own apartment before, so they might not know exactly what to do or how to manage or even how to keep their house clean. They may not even have the supplies to keep their apartment clean. And that's something that the case manager can help provide. They can give them cleaning supplies. The case manager has helped show the survivors, if you got something going on, you don't know how to fix it or, clean it or whatever, the case manager will work with them on that. And then when it comes to setting boundaries within their relationships, I think that's a big thing that the mental health counselor especially helps our survivors with. And not just setting boundaries with maybe their family and their partner that they had the violence with, who maybe they share kids with, but also setting boundaries with each other, because it is they came into this apartment complex together, and they formed a lot of bonds. And sometimes I think they don't know how to say no when they can't do something, so working with them on those boundaries too. And then we also work with engaging survivors in larger Unity House events and larger community events. So even outside of the Tapestry building. Unity House is a big agency. The domestic violence program outside of the Tapestry building, we also have housing programs that we have, I think, probably about 120 survivors that we help their families pay for housing. So we do big community events with all of them. And the survivors that live in Tapestry, we always welcome them to all of those events as well. And some of those events we'll hold at Tapestry, just to, again, bring in that community. This is actually a picture of pumpkin carving that they did last October, and that was a big community event, a whole Unity House DV event. And then just the DV groups within the Tapestry community, just increasing socialization, doing the things like the gardening group every week or the art group, doing just all kinds of things to help build that community. So that's kind of the case management stuff. I have a couple other pictures here as well. So the picture on the right, that was actually just stuff that they planted, all the survivors planted, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. We put it in the community garden. They had a holiday party in December, so that was just another thing. We don't have any pictures of people because, again, it's domestic violence. So, and just a little bit about our community and where the Tapestry building is located. It's actually in the middle of everything, I would say. It's within a mile of the downtown area, and there's a lot of shops in the downtown area. They have the farmers market every Saturday, which that's a big appeal for a lot of people. These are some of the organizations that we have collaborations with that are literally within a mile of the Tapestry building. So the Commission on Economic Opportunity, they do a lot of stuff to help families. They have some healthy, they have this program, Healthy Families, where they can help people set up doctor's appointments. They can help provide transportation. They do a lot of stuff around parents with kids who might be struggling with their kids, might not have the best parenting techniques. They do parenting classes and things like that just to kind of help them. They also have WIC in that building as well, so that's a great resource for a lot of the moms that have young ones. And Capital Roots is literally right across the street from the Tapestry building, and that's an amazing program. It provides farm fresh produce to the people in the community, and they also have a veggie mobile that goes around to different area housing authorities to provide fresh vegetables and fruits. They just bring it right to the people that are in those places, and it's literally right across the street from Tapestry. So the Tapestry residents can just go across the street and shop in their little store, and they can use their SNAP benefits for that as well.
And their store in their second phase of development is being expanded by 10 times because of the use, which they hadn't originally had in their scope of development, but given all of the foot traffic that's been generated by all the developments in this area, they're expanding that by 10 times, so it's very encouraging.
There's also the YWCA, which we get, Unity House gets a lot of referrals from the YWCA, and we also make a lot of referrals to them, and they put on a lot of community events that we participate in as well. The Salvation Army has a food pantry that gives a lot of stuff. I'm always telling our clients about it, and that's right down the street from the Tapestry building. That's within walking distance. It's a couple blocks down. Living Resources, that's a resource for people with disabilities, and that's also, I would say, about a mile from Tapestry, and they can help with all kinds of things around the disability, whether it be maybe helping a client get funding to put in safety bars in their tub or something like that. So they do all kinds of stuff with that. And then the Boys and Girls Club is about a mile away too. And that's great for our survivors that have kids that they may not have after-school care for. You know, they can link up with the Boys and Girls Club. And one thing that I forgot to put in here is that because of the eShy funding, we're also able to provide daycare funding for the survivors that live in the Tapestry building as well. So if they're trying to get a job or going to school, then the eShy funding helps pay for their daycare, and that's set up through the Unity House case manager.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just have her contact information. If anybody has questions for either Jennica or myself, please feel free to take a picture or whatever, reach out.
So thank you so much, Jennica and Jamie, for that great presentation on Tapestry House, and Dani. And Dani as well for just laying the foundation around intimate partner violence. So in the few minutes we have remaining, I don't know if there are any questions here, but if there are, please come to the microphone in the middle and just speak loudly, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So do we have any questions? Well, I actually have one, because and as you all come to the microphone, I think I would love to know from the builder's perspective, and then also from the agency involved in doing this work, was there really a major challenge that you had to overcome? Because part of this is helping the audience really understand that this can be done, right? That the partnership between the provider and the builder can really happen. So from the builder project management perspective, what were there language, understanding, basic issues that you had to overcome? And then from the agency perspective, was there a new lingo in working with a developer and a project manager that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely we were merging two different worlds. You know, I think Unity House is very versed in utilizing and assembling financing relative to service provision, and those applications look very different from a capital financing application, and that has its own associated lingos and acronyms, and so there was a merging of those two worlds, just speaking like financially. I think service provision also, I mean, the community builders, we are fairly versed in service provision. We have a community life department that does referrals, more, I like to say, soft touch services, where we're referring out to the experts in the specific locality that we're working in. So we have a certain level of diction, but I think that there was a bit of education that happened for all of the stakeholders at the table, not just the service provider and the developer, but also maintenance staff, certainly, and our property management staff. And even we had to educate state agencies. We had to educate the local housing authority. There was a lot of education that had to happen. And with the eShy funding, there's certain underwriting that happens on the capital financing side that they didn't understand all that the services, the dollars that the services needed behind it to actually provide effective services. So there was a bit of education in that way too, just so getting everybody kind of in agreement. And so there was a lot of education that happened. Yeah.
And just to add to that, the collaboration is wonderful, and it brings out amazing results for the clients. And if any of you are thinking about doing a project like this, I would say just have patience and try to take some time to learn and understand that you're working with a partner who doesn't have the same knowledge as you, and you can share each other's knowledge. There are some barriers when you don't necessarily know everything that the other partner does, but if you take the time to learn some of that piece, and like I said, just patience with the process, because really in the end it's so well worth it, especially when you see the clients that you're working with and how beneficial all of this was for them. So
The other thing is that the community builders approach to this was, we knew that we wanted to develop more housing. We knew that we needed an expert in service provision. So before even Tapestry was a glimmer in our eye, we were reaching out and doing a scan of the experts in Troy, and we landed on Unity House, and we met before we even walked the Meridian building, which became the Tapestry building. And so I think I would encourage, if you're a developer or if you're a service provider and you want to either develop housing or employ services at your development, just get to know who are your peers in the field in your specific municipality, and get to know those people before you have a deal right before you. Because once you have a deal and it gets legs, it's a train that you cannot get off, and it has its own kind of speed, and so it's better to kind of know who your partners are before the development gets its own kind of momentum going. So
That's a great point to end on, and so I would just like to thank Dani, Jamie, and Jennica once again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can we just ask one question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was kind of shocked because I'm like, I don't want to go on the mic, but I just wanted to ask a question. The Tapestry building, are the supers and the porters, they work for Tapestry, or is it outside?
There's no supers and there's no porters. We have a maintenance supervisor, but he does not live on site.
Right, but he's the maintenance supervisor is employed by Tapestry?
Yes, yep.
Okay, so the question I have is, if an organization that's similar, they have like the services in the building, but the supers and the porters are from an outside organization, like they kind of hired that company to, is it possible that the company that hired them put it in the contract that the supers and the porters should attend some type of
Absolutely.
training
I would
regarding-
highly suggest that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we
That's a great
have
idea.
third-party property management services at some of our other developments, and everyone's at the table, and everyone is beholden to the same set of rules in terms of how the property operates. Yeah.
I was just asking because recently the organization I work for, they have a outside, I guess, agency that's doing the property management, and now the supers are under that organization, but it's not required for them to like attend any like training regarding domestic violence and trauma. So I was thinking like maybe if they have to renew a contract or something, they could put that in there, because it's kind of like a big impact between the supers and the tenants.
That's one thing that I was going to suggest. If that contract comes up for a renegotiation, I would say definitely bring that to the table. Say we would like to have this in here, because it's really not that much. It's like a couple hours out of their day, and it gives them so much more knowledge. So it's definitely important to add that in if that contract comes up for renegotiation.
Okay. Others, please come to the mic because it's being recorded. I'm sorry, I have to make you walk, but.
I'm also a little bit shy, but it's okay. So my question, well, I kind of had a couple, but my main question is in terms of the property management. I come from the same company. Property management is outside, a different party, and when it comes to them being TIC informed, as staff, that hasn't brought up before, that we think they should be more TIC informed, because sometimes the communication between property management and our tenants can be difficult in terms of maybe not coming across as being as empathetic or as sensitive and as attentive to people's trauma and their experiences that they've been through and experiences their kids have been through, and most of our clients are families. So what are your suggestions of how the property management can be more TIC informed, and if there aren't any specific providers that any of you have used to have the property management more TIC informed, could you maybe share those providers names so that we could possibly give those providers as recommendations to our management, hey, this would be a good person that can maybe come in and provide that training?
Where are you located?
In the Bronx. Well, we have different sites, but
Okay.
I'm in the Bronx.
Dani, do you have any information about maybe any organizations you might refer them to?
I mean, there's the Family Justice Centers have trainings, but I don't know if they're specific to who it's specific to, who could attend, or you can reach out to community organizations like mine, and we can go.
Okay, so we're over the Family Justice Centers, and so we'd be happy to talk to you about that, but any good DV provider out there can really provide the training that you need. What you need is a provider to, for this agency, for this maintenance company, to create an opportunity, so they have to bring the folks in. And I think any DV provider can do a wonderful DV 101, can do trauma-informed care. What it is a linkage to a provider. Now, that certainly could be us, but it could be Project Safe Home. It could be myriads of providers that are in the city that would be happy to do that with you. So if you'd like to, one, reach out to our office, or even just stay and talk with Dani, I think that's clearly a possibility.
And I would add to that too is if you have property management team that isn't necessarily susceptible to the idea, just tell them this is something that's going to help you out in your interactions.
Right.
Maybe you're going to get less of a fight. If you are more informed about
Right.
this stuff.
And it improves long-term tenancy.
Yes.
So it adds to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a healthy bottom line, you have a safe community, right? So that's the argument. You work closely with your service provider, like they're going to troubleshoot where you're not collecting the rents and why, and help to manage that situation before it becomes out of control.
And can I also add that many domestic violence shelters, actually the maintenance happens by an external entity, and they do a lot of that training. And that's why I say, again, linking with a good DV provider, because they're already working with an external company, having gone through that training, and could be a company that could be recommended, but also could be an entity that could provide the training for your maintenance team as well.
Okay, and I have one other question real quick, which is in terms of the activities that you do, like the CUNY dinners and outings, like what does the scheduling of like the staff look like? Because I'm thinking CUNY dinners happen more in the evening. If it's outings, are those like weekend outings where then staff has weekend hours? Like what does the scheduling look like?
So the case manager and the counselor that's on site, their typical hours are like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. However, they flex their hours. So if they, for example, that Lake George outing where they did the cruise around Lake George, that was on a Saturday. So, they just took a day off during the week. They flexed it, obviously, so that they weren't both off on the same day. But then they were able to do that Saturday event with them. And they have that ability to flex their hours, just checking in with the supervisor. And another thing that we can do, too, is provide other staff support. So through the Unity House outreach program, the domestic violence outreach program, we have like another 25 to 30 staff members. So we'll always send out an email like, hey, they're doing this event at Tapestry. Can anybody come help out? And everybody loves doing those events anyway, so they all want to jump on that.
And Melissa?
You're welcome.
Wait, there's one more question.
There's one
Melissa.
more question. One more question. No, it's okay. It's one more question. It's fine.
It's actually a small question for Jamie. I wondered, the counseling that you provide, is it just for the adult who suffered from domestic violence, for the children as well, like family counseling, just that kind of?
So we actually have the counselor that's on site. She primarily does the counseling for the adult survivors. But, if any kids come in and want to talk to her, that's absolutely okay, too. Okay. We also have a youth counselor through the outreach program who has the flexibility to come to the Tapestry building, and she serves, that's through a grant-funded position, so she serves kids from the age of 5 up to 24, but that's like the youth population that we get that funding for.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
work with Jennica, so I'll pester her later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Can I just have a piece of paper?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The one that I stole and forgot to give back.
I had something on the back. So
Thank you.
it was great meeting all of you. Thank you for a great presentation. Thank you.
Made it through. I was like, I hope the voice doesn't go out.
I know.
Okay, I'm going to scoop.
I know you've got to catch a train. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't even.